and call the Facilities Committee to order.
Likes the world go by,
Mike, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Commissioner Blomberg. Dr. Chase.
Present.
Mr. Dasberg is not yet here. Dr. Marshall.
Here.
Ms. McDevitt.
Here.
Mr. Mosley is not yet here. Mr. Temple.
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. So much has happened, it seems, since our committee has last met. There's one thing I do have some prepared comments I wanted to talk to the committee about. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of the governor's September 6th letter to each of the K through 20 educational delivery systems. In the letter, the governor indicated there was a need to stimulate Florida's economy in a way that would generate new revenue without increasing taxes. And he's encouraging the legislature to appropriate PICO funding during the upcoming special session and have these appropriations be effective as soon as the special session appropriations are signed into law. So rather than a typical July 1 start date, this would allow PICO funding to enter the economy within the next 3 to 6 months rather than August or September of 2008. Our staff is working with the universities to determine which projects are most suitable for early initiation. Have identified almost $170 million of projects. These have been provided to the governor's office as well as the House and Senate staff. The projects primarily fall within the area of infrastructure and capital renewal and have either already received our approval or are on the list of projects to be approved today. Early indications are that the legislature or legislative leadership is giving serious consideration to the governor's proposal for PICO acceleration. However, I think the committee should also be aware that the governor has recommended delaying the 07-08 Facilities Challenge Grant program for both state university and community college systems until next year. Anything you want to say, Madam Chair?
I'm just enjoying your remarks.
20% of this appropriation has already been distributed to the universities, but the governor's office has so far denied further release of these funds, although governor's budget staff indicated that they will consider release on an as-needed basis. There does seem to be some legislative support for deferring the facilities matching program funds, which is at odds with the goal of stimulating Florida's economy. These projects total over $92 million and include such vital projects as the UCF Laboratory Instruction Building, which is $16.6 million, the UF Veterinarian Education Clinical Research, which is $4.2 million. In fact, over 83% of the current Cortellis projects, which is $76 million, are in the STEM disciplines of science, technology, engineering, and math, or in a health-related discipline, medicine, nursing, or dentistry. I urge each member and the university trustees to express their support for this vital program, which over the past 10 years has provided over $554 million of combined state and private funding. I just wanted to have an opportunity to bring this information to your attention because it almost doesn't go together. And we have a great appreciation for the fact that we want to rush in and stimulate our economy by speeding up the PICO process, but it also seems like it would make a whole lot of sense for us to also continue the matching grant program. So I ask the presidents and the trustees and the members of our committee to please do what you can to help stimulate that part of the process as well. So if we're really going to stimulate the economy, we can do it all around. So that was kind of like my opening hooray to get us going in the right direction. I don't know if you have any comments from the committee. No?
Well, here, I'd like to say here, well said.
Governor Marshall.
I'm just going to add the same thing. If there are any comments, any suggestions from anywhere around the table as to what we might do specifically to encourage this action, I think we ought to do it. This is, I think, a serious mistake that has been proposed.
I don't know. I guess I should ask the Chancellor, are we giving any specific direction to Rick or, any thoughts that sorry I didn't kind of prepare you for this ask, but can you tell me what kind of direction we're giving to our lobbying staff as it relates to the issue?
Well, we're pressing ahead and studying very carefully and supporting where possible and logical the legislative approach to the budget. And I think that it will be in the legislature that the decisions are made, the final decisions are made as to how the appropriations will be spent. So that's where we're focusing, and In fact, Mr. Maxey is there as we speak because there are hearings this morning that are relevant to the budget and to the matching grants. So he is there, and we would hope that the legislature will be consistent and ensure that the Cortellis matching funds are allocated and we can spend them as quickly as possible. So that's where we're focused, Governor.
And I guess maybe before the end of the day, if Rick has a chance to come back over, he can update us on anything that may have happened, just even during the committee meetings.
Yes.
And maybe give us some specific direction of some things that we can do as a body to try to help make sure we change this. Governor Chase?
I just have one comment, and that is if there is going to be an acceleration in PICO funding and building funds generally throughout the state, I'd like to see more information on the square footage in terms of what universities have relative to FTE, relative to instructional space, so that we see where the different campuses are in terms of their space needs. And I don't think that has really been a consideration in the past for most of the PICO construction.
Chris, you want to speak to that, I guess, and I'm asking specifically in response to Governor Chase's question as it relates to the process maybe that we've gone through as we've kind of helped to see which projects kind of fit into the category and can be accelerated.
Yes, I can speak, I believe, to that. What we have looked at in terms of what can be accelerated, the guidance we received from the governor's office was to say, look at projects that have already been approved, and we stretched that to say projects, that we're anticipating to be improved that could be accelerated within the next, 3 to 12 months. In other words, that's how much time that could be saved as opposed to a July 1 start date. So for the most part, we have given the universities the flexibility to select the projects they feel, because of the actual logistics of the construction job, they really could do it because the schedules that have been provided. We went through a similar exercise to this in 2001, and what happened after that was each project was tracked to see not only was the thought that it could be accelerated, but how fast was it accelerated. So there is quite a bit of accountability on these projects, and primarily it's either infrastructure projects, which are things of a smaller dollar nature. Maybe it's a lot equipment driven, where you need to order a new chiller or you're going to fix a sidewalk or do something very minor, but that gets the small, helps the small contractor. Or it's a project perhaps where it's already underway, you've done the planning, maybe you're in the early phases of construction, but you could accelerate your construction schedule. So for the most part, the projects on the list are not new projects, they're already existing projects. Because if we were to take a brand new project that the university hadn't really planned to start for 2 or 3 years, even with the dollars in hand, there'd be very little that could be done to accelerate it.
So it doesn't sound like we've taken into account your question. So if you could make sure, I think Governor Chase is specifically asking us about space utilization needs assessment as it relates to use of PICO dollars.
Okay. If it's not necessarily for this next year, but for the future, I think we need to start looking at the use of space strategically and how it's broken down on the different campuses, and who's actually lacking space in certain key areas that may be causing problems in different campuses.
And I think later in the presentation, I'll touch on that. I think we can go even further. We have the information. We consider that at the staff level, but you're certainly right, Dr. Chase. We haven't brought as much of the detail forward to the board for the board to give us guidance, in those allocations. And I think we don't have as much detail as I believe you're requesting today, but I'll certainly take that into consideration. We'll make sure we have that for the next round.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Okay, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the 0809 fixed capital outlay legislative budget request. Chris, you want to get us started, please?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. If you would, please, in your blue packet on your table, we have provided some additional information, and it should be the first handout. It should say Facilities Committee meeting additional information. It should be the title page. And I would like to first turn your attention to Exhibit A, which is a substitute page from your agenda packet. It's page 34 in your agenda packet. This is a substitute page. And what I'd like to spend the next few minutes doing is providing an overview of the process, of the factors that go into the process. And part of this is somewhat of a refresher, especially for those who have been involved in the PICO allocation process for maybe many years. But I know we have some new members on our board, and every year the factors change because of feedback we receive, the priorities that are set by this board and by the changing needs of the state university system. So I think spending a few minutes at the start of the process will be helpful. Exhibit A basically is our starting point. It shows in the first column where we ended up with in terms of actual appropriations. We ended up with $609 million in projects. We had a joint use facility, and we had $47 million in remodeling. We have the Revenue Estimating Conference provides an allocation to the Department of Education, and then Department of Education, following a statutorily prescribed formula, determines how much each of the delivery systems can budget from PICO. We cannot exceed that amount by law. For the first year, we have $394 million in projects, and that you see in the next year there's a steep decline to 125, and then it goes back up to 171. All I can say, and that's our starting point. Last year at this point, September, we had the gentleman from the conference come and speak to the factors that go into these estimates, and the board had noticed that there's a trend that the last few years the conference appears to be very conservative in its estimates, so that we're always getting this pleasant surprise of more dollars, in the later conferences. There'll be another conference in November and a conference right during the first week of session in March, typically is what will be scheduled. I'd like to hope that that trend will continue and that the conference will continue to be very conservative, but there's no guarantee of it. It no more than the same players that provide the general revenue estimates also are involved in the PICO revenue estimates. So as much as effort goes into GR, it still can be off, as we all know, as we get into the operating budget discussion. It's very possible that the PICO estimate could be off as well. I'd like to think they'll continue to estimate low and go high versus estimating high and ending up low. I have no information about where the trends are on that, but this is our starting point. Then with that, if you will turn to the next page, what I've done is provided a very high-level overview of how we've allocated those dollars. The first section is by BOG priority type, and you can see we have different types. First, these priorities were set by this board at its March meeting of what our priorities are. The first is continuation projects. Those are projects that have already received funding in 07-08, and that we are just continuing to finish what we started. I've broken that out into renovation, remodel continuations, and new space continuations. On those projects, the university is required to make those their highest priority, and we make those our highest priorities as well. Next is infrastructure. This is that general purpose category that's for all university, it's called repair, maintenance, remodeling, renovation, infrastructure. I forget, it's a long name. They can do very much with that. These are all for projects that are less than $1 million, so you're not going to get a new facility unless it's a very small storage shed or something of that nature out of infrastructure. But it shows a very large commitment of this board to maintain and keep the assets we already have. Next, renovation and remodeling. You can see that we have $9 million dedicated to renovation and remodeling, and that's this board's third highest priority. For the current year, we only have 2 projects totaling $9 million in year 1. So you can see then going to next, new space is the BOG's next priority. However, we have 6 projects there totaling $99 million in year 1. Now, you might look at that and say, why there seems to be, you would think there'd be greater dollars in renovation remodeling versus new projects, because that's the BOG priority. Here's where we see the other factor that comes into this. we rank the projects by the BOG priorities. The universities, we believe, they know what is the gravest, most critical need on their campus. Every university's list that they submit to us will have between 15, maybe 30 projects that if there was an unlimited budget, they would like to have possibly 15 or 20 projects. Typically, as we look at some of the detail, most universities may have 3 to 4 projects in any given year. So they rank them, and we very much weigh the university priorities in this. So if a university makes a new project a higher priority than a remodel, we will typically select the new project. So that's just some of the information there. And then we have no specialized space in year 1, nor land acquisition. And it totals at $394 million, which is year 1. The same information is presented in the next table. This is just over a 3-year period, and you can see we allocate all the dollars for the 3-year period. In addition, we even look forward, and though we've only been provided budget for the 3 years, we make commitments. If we provide planning dollars in year 3, there's projects that we are going to, by our policy of continuation, have to continue. So we've made future year commitments of $99 million already, so 4 years out. And if you go back and look at the estimate for like year 2 of 08-09, we had an allocation of $125 million. So if you think $99 million, infrastructure for all the state universities is running roughly at $90 million. We're already, we've pretty much spent year 4 and year 5 already. So I think we're pushing the budget about as far as we can push it, is the point there. The next thing I'd like to do in an overview, if you go to the next page, one of the discussions last year, I believe it came up in March and in January, is what type of buildings are we building? We have many initiatives, but, from the detail, it's very difficult to tell what is this classroom building doing. Is this a medical school? Is this providing increased baccalaureate production? What is it doing? We asked each of the universities to characterize each project by these types that you see: campus sustainability, improved geographic access, strategic discipline, increased baccalaureate production, economic development, medical education, or other. This is only for PICO, does not include Cortellis. And I asked the university specifically that even though I know many projects support all these objectives, what is its number one goal? What's your number one goal with this project? And based on the university's responses, here's how it breaks down. The lion's share is to campus sustainability, which of course includes infrastructure and most of the remodels. It includes things like FIU satellite chiller plant, which is infrastructural in nature. And then from there you can see there's a good 3 projects to improve geographic access, strategic disciplines, increased baccalaureate production, economic development. I think this table in and of itself may not be as useful. There's a supporting schedule further on in your packet that lists each project and shows, how the universities are characterizing these projects, and that may be something for you to consider. And if you have questions for the universities or want me to get back to you on that later and say, well, this particular project, the university has classified it as increased baccalaureate production. Why is that? What's the rationale for that? I do not have that at this time, but we can certainly get that very readily and very easily. Lastly, is the net assignable square feet. And this touches somewhat, I believe, on the direction of the questions Dr. Chase was asking. It may not go quite as far and have as much detail as he would like to see, but we certainly have that in our files. And what this is basically showing is, as of June 2006, as reported by the universities themselves, here is our current inventory of space. And it lists out our 10 official space categories, and we basically have a little over 30 million square feet. That's not gross, that's net usable square feet. And it does not include things, like dormitories, parking garages, student unions, anything that's, not instructional, E&G, as we know it. So this is where we start at, and then we look at the average need in each of these space categories. One of the things that I had meant to change, but the lateness of this presentation, if you forgive me, where it says SUS percentage of need met before, that's the need in 2012, 2013. We take, because facilities take 2 to 3 years to construct, and our year is a 2 to 3 years list, we're looking at the need 5 years from now. But you'll find that 5-year denominator, maybe it's a numerator, that's a very common period. That's one you'll see in the educational plant survey. You'll see that in the campus master plans. We're trying to look out into the future and project what the needs will be. And you can see, it varies from 81% for classroom space down to a low of 49% for instructional media. And then we were going to talk about what is being funded or recommended for funding for the current period by square footage. And what I want to point out there's one other document. It didn't get stapled in, but it's immediately following behind the packet. It's a one-page document. Has a lot of numbers. It's called Summary of New Space by Types, by University and Project. And what I want to, it's called Exhibit D4, and it's a one-page handout. What I want to point out there is that no one facility is all of one space type. That would be very rare. So you don't build a classroom building only. There will be a building that has classrooms, teaching labs, offices, and maybe several other space types. You don't just build typically a research lab. You might build a research lab that has teaching labs, possibly an auditorium. So it's what all that goes to say is it's not an incremental process. If we're at 81% of classroom, and we say we'd look at as a university, let's say that's the system need, but let's imagine a university was 81%, and they said, well, we'd like to get to 100 to 90%. Well, one building may take them, if it's a small university, one building of the size that's the right size to build might take them to 105%. But we wouldn't want to tell a university, no, you need to whack off a few classrooms, even though that's more efficient or the right size of building from a facility standpoint, because you can only go to 100%. And then it might take them, maybe it's a building that the university as a whole is under on classroom space, but is over in teaching lab space. But if it's a given discipline, what you wouldn't want to do is say, well, we're not going to put teaching labs in our chemistry building because we're over on teaching labs, and build all classrooms, and then when it's time for the students to take a lab, send them halfway across campus where your teaching labs are. Ideally, you put them all in one building. So all that to say, we try to, as a whole, to raise each institution up to the average level of system-wide needs. So we don't have one campus at 150%, another at 50% on any given category. And we don't have that, but it's not an incremental process. Things are built in chunks. So that's one complicating factor. With that said, let me just go through the list of what is being funded. As classrooms, I believe, I've heard over and over again, are the thing we're really trying to build. And even though we're at 81%, you can see by the university's own priorities, that is the largest amount of square footage we're adding to the system. We're adding 326,000 square feet of classroom space. We're adding 219,000 feet of teaching labs. Study space has been very low, historically at 50%, but we're adding a little bit of study space. Research labs, we're not bad at 76%, but we're not putting the bulk of our funding into research labs. I think if we looked at the Cortellis list, we'd see more going towards research labs there, but out of PICO, we're not building as much pure research labs. Office space, with the classrooms, you have to have faculty have to have offices. So we are building a lot of office space at 280. Auditorium, a little bit of auditorium at 43,000. Instructional media, that's an interesting category. That's, even though we're at 49%, we're not building much of that. That's one where, as a system, we need to go back to the factors and possibly adjust that down. Those, and I have my facilities guys here to help me out if I'm wrong on this, this is for things like projection booths for showing, films, or, back when technology required the use of space for the technology itself to do media presentations and those things. Or maybe if it was you're a music student, all those carols where you listen to the music, with a headset. That's rather dated, and so we're not building much of that. And then you can see the other categories, we're building very little of that. I think the key point takeaway is we're building classrooms, offices, and a little bit of research lab, and we're building teaching lab. We're not building much of the other space types as a system. And everything else in this package is supporting detail. And with that, Madam Chair, that's my overview of PICO, and I'd be glad to address any questions or move to the actual PICO motions.
Any questions from the committee? I do want to, thank you for this breakdown of information. I think that what I like about the way that you've actually presented this information is that it does show that we're thinking kind of overall as a system, and kind of really shows where we're allocating and spending our dollars. I think that's good information for us to have, as a committee. And I'm sorry that this was not something that we could have had in your board packets earlier, but there's so much detail to pull together. That's something that we had to make as a handout this morning. But I think that it was certainly worth pulling together to give us an idea of how we're spending our money. I'm sorry, Mr. Temple.
How do you figure, you got a column that says a percent of needs met. Who determines that?
Percentage of the needs met.
Yeah.
It's basically determined. The one factor is very easy. How much square footage do you currently have in the various space types? The other factors, the need, is very difficult. What we have right now is a formula, and it's a formula of many years of age, saying for each type FTE in various disciplines, based on the program they're in, based on the type of campus it is, here's the amount of space they need in these 10 space categories. So in theory, in practice, actually, what happens is you take the FTE, you take the program type, you plug it into the formula, and it says, this is what you need. However, there's a big however on that. So that's how that need number is calculated. The Facilities Task Force, in its recommendations, recommended that we look at the factors and update the formula. For example, one of the things we know in the formula is it looks at your library needs and looks at the amount of books you have and how much space you need for books. Well, we know that's changed a lot in the last 10 or 15 years. We got to figure out what the new factor should be. We have had a group of working with it. The Chancellor appointed a facilities work group. They have been working very diligently on updating those factors, and I'll be very frank, they are struggling with this because what they found, we have not looked at these factors and formula in at least 10 years, maybe more, right, Dan? And this was part of this is an old Board of Regents things. They had all these systems and processes at a university level just every year, collect this data and ship it up. Well, we haven't updated things in 10 years, and the data stopped being collected, and it just isn't in the right format that's needed. So then when the facilities group said, hey, that formula, those numbers we asked for 10 years ago, we need them again. And the people, the typical response is then, why? And, we've changed systems. We don't generate that anymore. We don't have that. We don't have it in the format that you need. And so it's been an exercise. We are going to succeed. We are going to have updated factors so that we can feel very confident of what the need is. I think that is one of the reasons, as staff, we really very much weigh what the university says it needs, because it probably has a better gut instinct of what the next priority is than just a purely formulaic application when we know the formula has some flaws in it. Or it's not flaws, it's just based on, it hasn't been updated in a long time. Long answer, I'm sorry about that.
Chris, if I could just ask, what is the, what kind of space usage do you have under the category other when you have 24,000 and 34,000 square feet under other? How are the 34 I can understand in a veterinary building, you probably have animal space, but what is accounting for 24,000 square feet in a biomedical science building?
Well, what's happening there is we do not have a category called other. We only have 10 official space categories. However, the university, under what was submitted, had classified space not in one of the 10 space categories and are struggling to say, well, you tell us what is it? And we have to engage in a dialogue and say, you have to basically pigeonhole that space and say, it's research or it's, because it's multi-purpose. We see this more and more where it's not just a classroom. It's a classroom that, with moving some walls, okay, all of a sudden it's an auditorium. Or we see that, with a research lab, moving some walls, it can become maybe a teaching lab. And so it is becoming more challenging to pigeonhole the space, but I feel we have to continue to stick with these 10 space categories. And so if you look at that Exhibit D4, I believe that's what you are looking at then, you can see there's a handful of facilities, 2 at UF, and I can well imagine, I don't know with the biomedical, Stan, do you remember the detail on the biomedical? Okay. We have to work with the university on that, and then with FIU, there's a little bit of space in their science classroom. Sometimes, because the projects are in the planning stages, they have a concept, but until the architect actually finishes the plan and design, they may not know what the space is. In all honesty, what you will see, the university, what's proposed here and what's put forward, those are educated professional guesses of the type of space that's going to be built. Until that the building is built and our team goes out and does an educational plant survey and counts ceiling tile and says, yep, that's a classroom, we don't know 100% that is the classroom. Maybe it's a teaching lab. Maybe it's study space. Governor Duncan.
We can go offline with this later, but I just want to throw out, particularly on the office use, and as you are getting to some of the other type of standards, and as the world maybe moves to less paper, not quite paperless, but different things, there's a tremendous amount of data out there from both the corporate and the public sector that I work with regularly, so I will be happy to help share some of that, because I don't think you need to reinvent the world on some of those things. There's already been a tremendous amount of research done in other venues that you could at least work from to try to apply some of that.
Well, thank you very much, and that may be the model we have to go on. I think we're trying to build on what we already have, but we're not getting there. We may need to start fresh and use it. Certainly we'll look at this corporate and
it won't have a direct application, but I just think we ought to be taking a look at, from an efficiency and space utilization perspective, how can we improve versus just kind of continue on the trajectory that we're on, because I think there's some good information.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to just piggyback onto what Governor Temple had asked on the need piece. Chris, you talked about the component pieces. Is there a factor in that algebra that adds space utilization? How many hours a day it is used? Is it used in the evenings? When you're determining need, the efficiency of the use of the space as well? Is it in the formula?
It is not in the formula.
Shouldn't it be?
It probably ought to be, but what we did in this case was, I'm getting a tug here. I'll have Stan come up. No.
I didn't think it was that hard a question. I'm sorry, Chris.
Oh, thank you. The formula incorporates a standard 60-40, meaning 60% utilization, 40 hours a week. What we did, in this case, however, because that's another thing that came out of the work groups, and let's look at our utilization standards again. I think the Chancellor directed a memo to all the university presidents saying, let's try to raise utilization. For each of the new projects, for those universities, I looked at utilization, and I did it based on, I kind of threw out the 60-40 standard, and I said, on an 18-hour day, universities, we have the data on utilization. Universities are using their space pretty much 6 days a week, and from as early as 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. but that's not certainly every classroom on every campus at every time. But that's the maximum, I would say, theoretical limit, because we have classes taught during that time frame. So I started with that raw data, and then I scaled it up to 60-hour week, and I looked at a 40-hour week. All the new projects that are on a list, with one exception, which is a new facility, a new site, have very strong utilization data. I think the high of that, I don't have it all in front of me. I think the high of it on a 40-hour week, I believe it was Gulf Coast, they get to brag a little bit. They were at, I think, 123% utilization of space. So I'm like, I think they need a new facility. So we did factor that in. One of the things I would like to incorporate, and this was, I'll give the Chancellor credit, this was his suggestion. He asked pretty much the same question you did. How does utilization factor in? So I went back, we ran the numbers, we looked at it, we weighed it in staff recommendations. I did not want to present that here today because I want the universities to know that that's how we're going to be looking at it, and also to know, that they could weigh in and say, oh, this utilization is off a little by a factor, or there's some other things. I didn't want to surprise the universities, but I think having it raised today at this meeting sort of puts the universities on notice, and I think we will, weigh utilization it'll be out in the open. We'll put what the utilization numbers are out there.
You're not talking about utilization just of new and requested buildings, but also currently existing buildings, right?
Right. We looked at utilization of existing before we looked at adding addition of new space. We also looked at, was there a space need as indicated by the university's plant survey? So we tried to make sure that it looked good from a utilization standpoint, from a plant survey, and from a plant survey standpoint.
Great.
And Madam Chairman, we need to keep in mind that we have boards of trustees that are also taking this into consideration when they're putting forth approving their PICO priorities, and that each university's had different missions. Many have different missions, and their use of space will be defined differently. So it is quite a complicated task you have, Madam Chairman. And when we talk about utilization, we have to talk about all levels and how it works within the university. Thank you.
Any further questions? No. So you're done with your presentation now?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm in a position of entertaining a motion, and I'd like to kind of redirect us back to what Chris started in saying that we've been pretty blessed every year, at least I've been working with the process that the number goes up, and so we're hoping that that's going to be the trend, that when we come back again, and after having the next PICO Estimate Revenue Conference, which is scheduled for when? When's the next conference?
It's, I believe, in early November. Is there anybody here who knows the exact date? Early November.
So hoping when we come back for our meeting in November, by that time we'll know our new allocation, which we're anticipating is going to be even greater, and have an opportunity to, I think Chris is keeping his fingers crossed, have an opportunity to even meet even more of our needs on our list of projects. So at this time I entertain a motion to approve the 0809 SUS Fixed Capital Outlay Legislative Budget Request and authorize the Chancellor to make technical adjustments to the Fixed Capital Outlay Legislative Budget Request as required.
Second.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
We're back on page 4 of the regular agenda.
Attachment 1, is it page 4?
Yes.
Yes.
Could you review the history, just so I know where we stand on the USF Lakeland Campus Plan?
Yeah. This is page 4 of your agenda packet.
I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry, John.
No, I just want to know, where are we with that? I mean,
I'd be glad to do that, Governor Temple.
I want to know what
This project,
I think everybody should know that.
right, I believe this is a very important project for the universities of South Florida, and of course for the entire state university system, as are all the projects on this list. The history of this is, in terms of appropriation, it was approved by there was funding provided through the process in 0506 and 0607, totaling $5 million. And then last year we had It was on our list, the BOG list, for $1.7 million. It was increased by the legislature to $10 million and was then vetoed by the governor. I believe the governor, in statements I've seen in the press, has indicated he wished, well, I don't say he wished he hadn't vetoed it, but there was some misunderstanding, there was some confusion in the data. Tax Watch had recommended, then had rescinded the veto on it. And so it had been approved by our board at $1.7 million. This is a new site. It's new land. The university decided to move forward with the acquisition of this site, I believe in 2002, 2003, during the period when Board of Regents was in its final stages or had basically dissolved, and before the Board of Governors had really gotten going operationally. The legislature had provided the university's authority to acquire land. The university went forward and acquired this land site since that time and requested dollars to develop the infrastructure on that site and to build a new facility. Currently, the university shares a facilities and a particular joint use facility with Polk Community College. What the university would like to do is to have its own site, its own campus. It will retain some of the facilities with Polk Community College, but will release the balance of the space to Polk so that Polk can grow and expand its programs. They have a very good and cooperative relationship with the community college. And so that's some of the history. So this is, and there was a presentation, as I think some of the board members who were here at the time recall, where USF, Marshall Goodman, the president of USF Lakeland, provided very extensive history and process of what had happened. At that time, the board heard the presentation but didn't make a formal motion, but from that presentation, we approved, and the PICO request, $1.7 million for planning. And I don't know, President Genshek, if you're looking my way, do you want to add some to that, please?
No, I think you've done an excellent job of summarizing.
Madam Chairman, I think, as I understand it, the Board of Trustees at USF has recommended the amount that you see on this list as their priority to get this campus going, because as I understand it again, the land was acquired through a donation as opposed to outlay of dollars, and they have a particular time period in which to build on it before it reverts. And I think we're getting very close to that.
And just this week, we received a $5 million donation to help to build the infrastructure, and I know that donations will be increasing in the Polk County area as well to help.
This goes back, this conversation started when I was on the Board of Regents, before the Florida Board of Education, and now the Board of Governors. So it's a long conversation.
Any further questions? Any questions before we take a vote? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Yes. I'm sorry. Dr. Genshek?
This week, the governor has been making regional visits, and President Hinton and I were able to be a part of some business people as well as ourselves in this particular visit. And one of the items that he brought up was the hope that when we initiate these new buildings and to stir the increase in economy, that we have a preference for selecting Florida construction companies and Florida architects in Florida, etc. And it wasn't any kind of a rule or authoritarian kind of thing, but I took that very much to heart, and I would just encourage us all to be Florida bound.
Yeah, that does bring up a question. When you mentioned the governor's push for Florida contractors, which I think is a good thing for us to consider as we try to boost our economy. And Yeah, Chris, also, I know that there's also a big push to be, I guess, as, what is that? I'm missing the buzzword for being, very green conscious.
Yeah, LEED certified, or
Right.
that type of thing.
Sustainability. And I guess my question is that based upon, I guess, what's happening, I guess, within the industry these days, the numbers that we're proposing, do you think that they actually include, I guess, being green conscious with our construction and what we're pulling together, or is it that folks are going to come back to us and say, that we didn't have enough money to do the things we want to do because it costs more to, I guess, to be conscious of I guess, being green conscious or conscious of sustainability? I guess that wasn't a very artful way to put the question, but you understand what I'm asking you?
I'll do my best to try to see if I understand the sense of it. And I'm not, by training, an architect or an engineer. I have them backing me up here. But what I understand is we do not, at this point, constrain the universities on their cost per square foot. We look at it, we see if it looks reasonable, but we don't come back and say, in the Board of Regents state, we would pretty much say it's X per square feet for this type of classroom or this type of building, and you'll get no more. If you want more, go find it elsewhere. We are giving them a lot of flexibility to build the type of facilities that they need. With that said, my understanding, and I've seen a lot of examples of this around the system, the universities have very active programs in sustainability because, one, it's the right thing to do, but they find you do probably put a little more up front into the building cost, but in the long run, you save by doing it right. It's the idea of, do you build a 50-year roof out of metal or, tile, or do you put in 20-year shingles? That type of thing that we can understand as lay people. They do that as much as possible nowadays at the university level. Our standards have always been, we're building 50-year buildings. I think with sustainability, that is being taken more and more to heart across the university community.
Governor Duncan?
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing in the industry is that that gap is coming down rather significantly as the contractors and the subcontractors and just the general demand for that. I mean, the latest number I saw for a platinum building was less than a 3% premium. So the days of hearing the 10% or 15% premium that would create such a huge swing, I think, are really coming in check. So I would hope that's happening. And I know FSU has been very aggressive in doing some performance contracting where there's opportunities to go in and retrofit and have, kind of a cost savings payback period analysis and done. And so I think there's a lot of that happening, and it may not be as big of a hit down the road.
Thank you very much.
And we could probably gather some information on that from the universities, and maybe not in a committee meeting, but just provide that as information out to the facilities committee just to have a sense of what the universities are doing. I think the committee would be very pleased to know about the good things that are going on with that.
I like that.
And I think, Mr. Chairman, I think by you as chairman of facilities directing our staff and then the trustees to take that into consideration in their planning when they put forth their priority list. And I believe the universities are doing that, but from your position, make that request, and I think you'll be satisfied with the answers from the universities.
I think what I'd like to do is go at least gather the information that we can see, what direction at our next committee meeting or, one or next one or the following one.
We will most certainly do that. That's a wonderful idea.
Right. The next item on the agenda is the campus master planning lessons learned assessment.
Thank you. What I'd like to do is there's a group that was appointed on campus master planning, and as we've touched on somewhat today, the universities and their board of trustees go through a very extensive process on all the buildings, and this includes the campus master planning process where they work within their local community to determine what they're going to be building for the next 5 to 10 years. And it's a very prescriptive process in statute because it not only affects the university but does affect the surrounding communities. So the state of Florida has thought it was very important to have, full public disclosure, public hearings for anything of significance that the university is going to do. And we have today with us Steve Pfeiffer. He's headed this advisory group. He's the general counsel at New College, and he's going to very briefly touch on the work of this advisory group I think they have some terrific recommendations in this report for us to consider at a later time, and I think he will very much be glad to do that. I will point out, if you're worried, Dr. Chase corrected me, so some may be worried. On page 41 of your agenda, it says we're going to have an exam. No, we're going to examine the issues. There will not be an exam on campus master planning. So with that, Steve, come on up.
Thank you, Chris. You should all have in your materials a report that looks like this, called Campus Master Planning Lessons Learned Assessment. In 1985 and 1986, Florida's legislature passed landmark growth management laws. For our purposes here today, we can reduce the importance of those laws to a couple of sentences. Local governments were required to adopt comprehensive plans, and once the plans are adopted, all development within the jurisdiction of the local government, all development, public and private, needed to be consistent with the local government comprehensive plan. This means not only the density of development and the location of development, but the infrastructure needs generated by the development all had to be dealt with in the process before the local government. When it was reduced to a position of looking at universities, local government comprehensive planning gave local governments the ability, if they chose to exercise it, to control the amount of development that would happen on our campuses, the location of developments, the intensity of development, and the timing of development on our campuses. In fact, if they wished to be bold enough, local governments were in a position to become the planners for all of our university campuses. The legislature recognized problems with that kind of approach, and in 1994 adopted legislation that's now codified in Chapter 1013 Florida statutes that establishes the Campus Master Plan and Campus Development Agreement process. This process allows our universities to adopt campus master plans that address future growth on the campus in different time frames, that address infrastructure needs that would be generated by that development, and provides a vehicle for entering into development agreements with local government, whereby the local governments would essentially approve development consistent with the campus master plan in exchange for funding that's come from the state university system concurrency management trust fund to pay for off-site infrastructure impacts of university development. What the legislature essentially recognized is that universities, in many respects, are the development that happens on university campuses just like any private development. We do generate infrastructure needs. We do cause traffic. We do impact transportation facilities. We do impact potable water, solid waste, wastewater treatment facilities, and we need to deal with that. But on the other hand, we are ourselves infrastructure and perform an important state function that needs to be governed by the state university system and by the universities, not simply by the local governments. The campus master planning process was amended in significant process ways in 2005. The campus development agreement and master planning process has become a focal point for town gown kinds of disputes and for places where those kinds of disputes get focused, where neighbors and local governments, where universities lie, will typically focus contention. Because of that, the Conflicts Resolution Consortium, the Florida Conflicts Resolution Consortium agreed with the university system based on funding that they had received to enter into a study committee to look at this issue. I was selected to chair it, I suspect because I'm a fairly rare person who has seen the campus master planning process from the perspective of a regulator at the Department of Community Affairs, from the perspective of an attorney in private practice representing local governments and in some cases citizens groups who have had quarrels with campus master plans or campus development agreements, and also as counsel for a state university. We attempted to assemble a study group that would have all of these interests at the table to look at the process and identify where it needs improving and what we can do to accomplish that. We included representatives of cities, counties, representatives of the universities, Ken Ogletree from the staff of the Board of Governors, representative of citizens groups, planners, lawyers, to look at the process. The report that you have in front of you is the result of our work, and it's not dramatic to stand in front of you and say that the real bottom line of our report is that we have a process here that's working quite well. That universities are adopting campus master plans that are consistent with local government plans. The local governments and universities are dealing with off-site infrastructure, and that by and large the process provides means for resolving disputes that happen. While that is true, there are two key recommendations that we have made. One is that the funding mechanism for campus master planning and campus development agreements is an absolutely fundamental aspect of the success of this process. It allows universities to negotiate with local governments about off-site impacts, and when agreement is reached as to what those things are and what they will cost, to actually pay our fair share of the cost of those facilities. And we have certainly recommended a continuation of that funding. I understand that for the moment the funding source is secure, and we certainly stand ready to assist you in maintaining that. The second recommendation we have made is with regard to regulations that relate to the campus master planning process. These regulations have not been revised in a long time. The 2005 legislation adopted by the legislature empowered this board to adopt regulations with regard to the process, and as yet the regulations have not been adopted. We're staying with regulations adopted by the former Board of Regents and by the Department of Community Affairs. From my own perspective, the issue about these rules, regulations that are out there now is that they bury you in minutia. They require planning steps to be taken that if you stretched out all the arms in this room, the paper that lists all the criteria would be longer, and it doesn't lead to vibrant kinds of planning documents. We believe at universities that our planning documents should plan for the future growth of our campuses in a way that will, with each piece of development, with each development opportunity that happens, make our campuses better places, better designed places, and not worse ones. So our recommendations have been that the Board of Governors convene a collaborative group to propose regulations dealing with the campus master planning process. We didn't want to make a recommendation and simply wave goodbye. We have offered the services of this group and of the Conflict Resolution Consortium to assist in a collaborative way to adopt to develop proposed regulations. We believe that it's important that in any regulation development process dealing with these issues that the interest groups, including local governments, including public interest groups, including universities, including the Board of Governors, planners, lawyers, all be at the table to discuss those things. So this is our report, this is our recommendations, and I'm happy for the opportunity to have participated in this.
Any questions from the committee? I think the idea is that the information will be presented to us in this meeting. There are some very specific recommendations regarding some legislative action that the committee is suggesting that we adopt. So what I'd like to do is if we could receive this information at this particular meeting, and then at a later meeting bring it back and make a determination about whether or not we'd like to move forward on some of the recommendations. So I would ask, I guess as we plan for our next couple of committee meetings, if you would kind of bring this back to the forefront of the members' minds as you're briefing them, and let them know that if they refer back to this document, they get an idea of what it is that we're thinking about and kind of get a feel for it. Does that work for you?
Yes, thank you very much, Governor Parker.
Then, Chris, if you can now move forward with the 06-07 bond report.
Yes, I'll do that, but that will be very briefly. This is the first time we've created this report. As you know, we adopted the debt guidelines in April of 06. We've gone through a year of approval of bonds, and this is the information as best as I could summarize it, and then there's some summary detail behind it. This is the summaries on page 59 of your agenda packet, and what I would just point out is that with all those bonds that we have approved, it adds up to a lot of money, $314 million, and you compare that to PICO was a little around $600 million. But through the universities, through their own resources, whether those are parking garages and parking transportation fees, up to stadiums, dormitories, there's a whole world of infrastructural that is not PICO, but is very critical to the life of the universities. And I just wanted to point that out and let the committee know that we do not only track the approval and put the universities through the debt guidelines and through this board for approval, but we follow back up with them afterwards to see, what did they issue at, what was the rate. We look at what, was proposed versus the actual, and just basically do our due diligence. And we will provide this type of report on an annual basis. If any of the committee members would like to see additional information, I know one of the requests we received was, could you put the closing date? So we will put the closing date because that's very telling for those who are into the financial side of things to look at what your rate was on a given date. But I think the rates are still, for us, as on tax-exempt basis, extremely competitive, and this is a terrific venue. And as always, I'm sure we bring forward at the next committee several, debt issuances for approval.
Any questions from the committee?
Chris, I just have one question, and that is, why do the figures, some of the figures in terms of the rates differs on page 59 from the rates that are given actually in the other tables? For instance, the FIU Stadium there is at 4.45 in the back, but it's at here it's 4.06 to 6, 4.6.
I will have to say I do not know, Governor Chase. I will have to look into that and see if there's a discrepancy or if there was something in the summation that it came out wrong. I will reconcile those two and give that back out to the board as a supplement to this. And I know Gulf Coast has pointed out that they have, I believe, fixed their variable rate. So I'll work with the universities to make sure this is absolutely accurate.
Thank you. Any other questions? I guess one thing, I'm really just interested in debt service. I'd like to make sure that they're paying the debt. And is that question answered for me where it says total debt service, and then you have, is there someone on this chart that confirms that yes, they are meeting the deadlines and making the payments?
Actually, no, we don't have that on there. That same as proposed is just same as proposed. In other words, did we feel like what they proposed to our board when they actually issued, was it substantially, give or take, it wasn't material, any differences in it. We do not, as a system, track, compliance with debt service payments. If it's issued through Division of Bond Finance, of course, they track that on behalf of the universities. If it's a university's own debt, it's up to the university to, make its payments. I would say, though, if a university was ever late on a debt service payment, it would be immedately known. That would be headlines, and I don't know how we would know that until it happened. I pray that would never happen.
So you tell me that no news is just good news, that we're assuming that it is definitely.
Yes, that would be devastating to any university. That would be horrible, and it would certainly affect the entire system if that were ever to happen. So I don't know how we would. The only thing I can say is I know from a financial position, each university is a very strong balance. It has a reserve for just such an emergency contingency like that, and I don't think any of our universities are in any danger, and also of anything like that. Plus, the ratings that they receive, the fact that we've had all these issuances, and some of these are enhanced credit, but the underlying ratings on most of these are like A minus. They're strong ratings. If they were, if the rating agencies thought there was any danger of that, we would not see these good, strong ratings. So I think it's a valid concern, but I don't know that we can do more than what we're doing now. I didn't entertain any concepts any of the board members have if that is a concern, because that would be a concern of mine.
I mean, just your indication on the record that if it were to happen, it would be this news. It's news to me. It's something that I'm glad to hear. I just wouldn't know. I didn't realize that it would be such a big headline that if something like that happened, that it would come to our attention.
It would be it's very rare for a municipality or local government to default on debt, and when it does, it's nationwide news when it does happen.
Any other questions? I just want to thank you for pulling this kind of document together, because I think that what happens is that we start approving these bond initiatives kind of in a vacuum, it feels sometimes to me. It's like I kind of want to know what other things are outstanding for the university so we can make a more informed decision. A document like this makes a difference. The other thing is that I want to caution the committee and caution the board that when we are considering the bond initiative, so often we're in a rush and we just kind of breeze through it. I ask that we have specifically asked for the authority to approve the bond initiatives, and I want to make sure that we're getting all the information that we need so we're making informed decisions. It doesn't look as if we're just kind of blowing it off and saying yes without looking at the detail. So thank you very much, and thank you for providing a lot of the background in our individual briefings so we're ready to make the decision at the meetings.
You're welcome.
Anything else? Yes,
Governor
sir.
Parker, I actually had a question, and I don't know if this is the correct committee, but something that I asked the staff about was the CITF funds, and I know that either this year or next year that they might be released, and I know there's some questions on whether or not the returns are that great, but I was wondering if maybe in subsequent committee meetings we could maybe get some information about that, because I know with increased construction costs, the timing might be a good thing to note.
Okay.
I don't know if that was possible.
Yeah.
You want to respond to it administratively?
Yes, thank you. I'd be glad to do that, Mr. Mosley.
What they're doing with it,
With
or
the
what
Capital
they have.
Improvement Fee Trust Fund, as you know, the source is the building fees and student improvement fees. Those fees have not been increased since 1988, and with, we've bonded out a lot of those dollars already, and with increased, just inflation and then cost escalation since 1988, I'm running the numbers for 0809 to see if it is even possible to have a CITF issue, but it just looks like there wouldn't be enough bang for the buck. Possibly in 910, we'll put something forward for our next committee meeting to look at that and look at this. The only way I could see a possible issue is if there was some chance of increasing the revenues on that. Otherwise, we could do an issue. But each university, these are typically for things as student unions, student life type facilities, health centers, and if you don't have enough dollars, you need a whole new building. Just to have enough to put on a wing is not satisfactory, I don't believe, to the students.
Just a quick follow-up question. So then conceptually, what do we see improving, I guess, for next year, for the 09-010 release? Because our construction costs are projected to go up and all that. How does the bank of buck work?
Well, basically, when we have a CITF budget proposal, it's made up of the cash that's accrued in the account and the projected debt that we can issue on the revenues over and above debt service, and also child care centers are paid from CITF. So we want to have what will change is we'll accrue more cash and we'll pay down the debt a little bit more, so it's almost, you're saving up money to put a down payment down on a house. You have to have your cash, but maybe you're trying to, increase your income a little bit too. And so it may look just slightly more favorable. You make a very telling point, though. I don't know if we can keep up with the cost of construction. So we will have a new issue. I want to go on the record as saying that there will be a new CITF issue. I'm just trying to weigh the proper time to do that. I will have the information to present to the committee for its next meeting so they can see all the support for that. And if the committee decides to move forward sooner than later, we'll go in that direction. If they look and say, push it out. And of course, this board can also weigh in on the revenue side of things as well.
Thank you. Does that respond to your question? So you would be prepared to bring that back to us as a committee to review, and I think it's a very good question.
Excellent question. Thank you.
Any other comments from the committee? I'd like to end the meeting as we started. That is, again, to say that that the idea of making dollars available faster for the universities is something that we think is a great thing. When I look back on my notes and see that in dollars that you would have expected in September of 2008, that you get in the next 3 to 6 months, that's a wonderful proposal, and we appreciate that. So I don't want to seem that we're not appreciative of the fact that that's a novel idea, and it's a great example of showing the state how our universities are not just something that's wonderful for our students, but they're economic engines for the state. So I applaud the governor for recognizing that and finding a way to get more money into the system. However, we always want a little bit more, and we really do need the matching grant. It kind of makes the process complete. So we ask that, as our trustees, our university presidents, the members of the Board of Governors, whatever we can do to encourage the legislature to go back in and fund that part of it as well, I think will complete the puzzle. So, do you have any comments, Dr. Henry?
Just to underscore what you're saying, Governor Parker, some of us have projects that have blended financing where we have proceeds from bonds issued, PICO money, and matching funds. So if you're knee deep, in a project and you're under construction and the matching funds are withheld on private donor gifts, it can cause you some problems.
That is the idea. We like the idea of planning and being able to budget. And when we have something pulled from under us, it's very difficult for us to do that. So again, whatever we all can do as a unit or as individuals, we'd appreciate. And if there's nothing else, meeting is adjourned.
Well done.